My father accused me of forging Grandpa's will. Then the judge realized who I really was.
The first time my father called me a thief, I was standing in a courtroom wearing the same uniform I had once worn while serving on dangerous NATO missions. And the worst part, he looked proud when he said it. "My daughter forged my father's will," he told the judge loudly, his voice echoing across the courtroom. People in the gallery whispered. Some stared at me with suspicion, others with curiosity. To them, I was just another defendant standing beside a lawyer. But none of them knew who I really was. Not yet. My name is Lisa Carter, and the story of how I ended up in that courtroom began months earlier, when I returned home after one of the hardest deployments of my life. When the NATO transport plane landed that morning, the sky was gray and quiet. The mission had lasted 7 months. 7 months of sleepless nights, coded transmissions, and operations so classified that even now I can't describe most of them. But I remember one thing clearly. When we landed, the commander shook my hand and said, "You saved more lives than you'll ever know, Carter." I smiled politely, but inside I felt tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. All I wanted was to go home. But home wasn't what I thought it would be. The first call I received after landing wasn't from my family. It was from a lawyer. "Miss Carter," the man said carefully, "I regret to inform you that your grandfather passed away last week." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My grandfather, Henry Carter. The only person in my family who had ever believed in me. The only one who never treated me like a disappointment. When I told him I was joining the military years ago, he didn't laugh like the others. He saluted me. "Go make us proud, kid," he had said. And now he was gone. I flew home the next day. The house felt different without him. Cold. Quiet. My father, Richard Carter, barely looked at me when I walked through the door. He had never approved of my career in the military. In his eyes, I was the reckless daughter who chose danger over a normal life. My brother Daniel, on the other hand, was the golden child. A successful businessman. Perfect in every way, according to my father. At least that's what he thought. The will reading happened 2 days later. Our family lawyer gathered us in the living room. My father sat stiffly in his chair. Daniel scrolled through his phone, bored. I just stared at the old photo of my grandfather on the wall. Then the lawyer began reading. Most of the estate went to charities my grandfather supported. But when he reached the final part, the room went silent. "To my granddaughter, Lisa Carter," he read, "I leave the family house and the remainder of my personal assets." My father's head snapped toward me. Daniel looked stunned. And I felt confused. Because I hadn't expected anything. I had only wanted my grandfather back. But my father's shock quickly turned into anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. The lawyer frowned. "Mr. Carter, your father's wishes are clearly stated." "No," my father interrupted. "My father would never leave everything to her." He pointed at me. "That girl barely comes home." The room went silent again. And then he said the words that started everything. "She must have forged the will." At first I thought he was joking. But he was. Within a week, he had hired lawyers and filed a legal complaint accusing me of fraud. Fraud. Against my own grandfather. The same man who had written me letters during every deployment. The same man who told his friends proudly that his granddaughter was protecting people overseas. And now my own father was calling me a criminal. The trial was scheduled quickly. Apparently, family drama makes for fast legal action. On the morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse wearing my uniform. Not for show, but because I had come straight from a NATO briefing. The courtroom filled quickly. My father sat confidently beside his lawyer. Daniel looked uncomfortable. And when I walked in, my father rolled his eyes. "Still playing soldier," he muttered loudly. Some people in the gallery laughed quietly. I ignored them. Years in the military teach you something important. You don't react to noise. You focus on the mission. The judge entered the room moments later. A serious man with silver hair and sharp eyes. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. My father's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, we believe the defendant manipulated the will of Henry Carter in order to gain control of his estate. He spoke confidently, like the verdict was already decided. Then my father stood up and pointed at me again. She was always desperate for attention, he said bitterly. Running off to the army instead of building a real life. Now she's stealing from her own family. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they came from him. The judge listened silently. Then he turned toward me. Miss Carter, he said calmly, what is your response to these accusations? I stood up slowly. The room felt heavy with expectation. I didn't forge the will, Your Honor, I said simply. That document reflects my grandfather's wishes. My father scoffed loudly, but the judge didn't react. Instead, he picked up the case file and started reading. His expression slowly changed. His eyes moved across the pages again. Then he looked up at me. And for the first time, he looked surprised. Wait, he said quietly. The entire courtroom froze. The charges are against you. The question sounded strange. My father frowned. Of course they are, he said impatiently. She's the one who forged the... Silence, the judge interrupted. He was staring directly at me now. Then he said something that made the room even quieter. Are you Captain Lisa Carter, the NATO Joint Operations Command? My father blinked in confusion. Yes, Your Honor, I answered calmly. The judge leaned back slowly. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he shook his head slightly, almost like he couldn't believe what he was reading. Mr. Carter, he said, turning toward my father, do you know who your daughter is? My father frowned. She's my daughter, he snapped. The judge closed the file gently. No, he said quietly. She's the officer who led the evacuation mission that saved over 200 civilians during the Baltic crisis last year. The gallery erupted into whispers. My father looked stunned. The judge continued. She received a NATO commendation for bravery and a presidential citation for service. Now the entire courtroom was staring at me. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my father. Because for the first time in my life, he looked small. Then the judge said something no one expected. Given Miss Carter's classified service record and the documented communications between her and the deceased, he said firmly, this court finds no evidence of fraud. He paused. The will stands exactly as written. My father's face turned pale. But, he started. The judge raised his hand. And Mr. Carter, he added coldly, you may want to reconsider making public accusations against a decorated officer without evidence. The gavel struck the desk. Case dismissed. The courtroom exploded into noise. Reporters rushed forward. People whispered. But I barely heard any of it. Because my father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You never told us any of that, he said quietly. I shrugged. You never asked. Then I walked out of the courtroom. Not angry. Not victorious. Just tired. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on the battlefield. Sometimes they're fought at home,